Working with children and young people as a therapist and as a counselling psychologist has been some of the most challenging and fun parts of my work as a therapist. I think that combination of working with young people who have so much going on within their lives and are developing and changing almost as you watch them, if you're in a longer term relationship with them, becomes such an interesting and rewarding kind of process. And for me, I think there's something very interesting about working with a client group that I almost feel as a culture we don't fully understand yet. We talk about children or adolescents as if they're terms that are fixed, and yet historically they're still quite new arenas for us. 100 years ago, adolescents, so people maybe between the ages of 11 and 16, wouldn't have necessarily have been embedded within an educational system. And I guess we often talk about adolescence as, or one of the identifiers of adolescence is that shift from thinking about individuals who are now in full-time education who maybe previously would have been in full-time work at that time. And I think there's a sense that we're still coming to terms with, well, what does that mean as a culture? What are we doing with these individuals? And it's almost, if we think about schools, it's the schooling process there really as an opportunity to almost inform people about educational facts or to prepare people for their future lives. And the counselling process sort of fits into that in some ways, about whether or not we're supporting the social and emotional kind of aspect of a person's development. And realistically, it becomes very important not to see young people as having multiple needs. So I think there's this need for education or academic attainment that becomes a very important part of where people are going in their lives. But then this social emotional aspect needs to run concurrently. If we look at the kind of research into the distress that young people face, commonly it's very high. So on an international scale, I think there are reports of very high levels of depression or anxiety that may present themselves or manifest as activities like becoming too angry or harming themselves or having eating sort of issues. And there's a real need for thinking about how different individuals may need different responses. So for some individuals it may be that a great teacher or a great community or a great family becomes a support structure that they have to help them understand their life better. Whereas at other times it may be helpful to have another individual who is outside of these cultural kind of contexts, so thinking about family or society or schools, where they have the opportunity to explore their lives further. And I think that's the position that a therapist can often take for an individual. If we look at the figures within the UK, commonly it's cited that one individual out of every 30, one individual out of every 10 actually, is viewed as having a serious mental health issue that may benefit from further support. So I think it's not like there's a small number of people who may benefit from these more targeted interventions such as counselling. And that might be contrasted to interventions that run alongside counselling, like whole school interventions where people may do classes about emotional health, or again in the UK we have a scheme called Philosophy for Kids. So these activities that really encourage young people to think about who they are, that may complement or may help them understand their own self-concept. And all of these kind of elements really fit within that realm of seeing people as maybe a biopsychosocial being. So I guess young people have biological changes that are going on throughout the period of, from the period of being, 4 to 25, however we sort of delineate adolescence. There's a huge amount of physiological changes that go on, including puberty and becoming sexually mature individuals. They have a society that they have to sort of navigate, so whether it's friendship groups or kind of families that they live within and beyond, almost the kind of going into the internet and these sort of communities that they're commonly engaging with. Alongside the psychological aspect as well, in which individuals are maturing and becoming more static in their understanding of their self and understanding how they want to be in the future. So this culmination of really thinking about the biological changes, the psychological changes and the social kind of impact really is a difficult period for some individuals. It means that having extra therapeutic support could be of help. But then, in addition to also understanding what adolescence is, I think there's also this sense of, well, what are we doing as therapists? Historically, there was almost a tradition where we said, here's an adult service, and we'll create that, but we'll create it in a youth setting. And I think increasingly we're now acknowledging that that's not always the best way forward, and that there may be something distinct and unique about working with young people that needs a different type of service. So therapists or therapeutic services with young people are often really trying to, or some of my interest is about challenging that and saying, well, what is an accessible service? And it goes into the territory of really thinking right from the outset that when we receive a referral from about a young person, it may be that we have an angry young man or an over-emotional young woman in terms of the way that people describe this person. And there's something about not taking that for granted, really, and thinking that actually we need to meet with that person. We need to ask them, well, do you want to be in counselling? What reasons do you want to be in counselling? And taking it seriously that a young person will have an opinion about this, rather than necessarily just taking for granted the referral message that we've got. And also taking seriously if a young person says that they don't want to be in therapy, then I think it's important that a person has a choice and that it's really their option of whether or not they will engage in therapy or not. And then when we've kind of got through that, there's something about creating the accessible services themselves. So another movement is really about creating services in places that young people want to go to. Again, some of the services historically may have been typically within health service settings, where a parent or someone may have had to take that individual to the clinic for support. When I think increasingly there's a move to create services within settings where young people commonly go. So maybe school-based counselling or even online therapy is very much a developing area that is challenging to a lot of professionals who I think typically want more control over the work in which we're engaging in. So there's the settings and there's the kind of taking the young person's voice seriously. And then when we're with young people, about a need to be responsive to the type of issues that a person is bringing, really. So rather than taking a one-size-fits-all approach to therapy, we need to be being creative and responsive. So some of the work that I did I can remember with a young man, was about creating music rather than actually wasn't about sitting with one person here and one person here and expecting people to talk about their problems. It was about creating a song that reflected their challenges that they were encountering in the world. And commonly in the youth literature, youth counselling literature, you might see people using artwork or different forms of expression as a way to encouraging people to explore themselves and understand the worlds in which they're encountering. But then the other bit is also not taking things for granted at the other end of the therapeutic relationship as well, and assuming that because we feel that something has gone right, that it's continually going right in session 1, session 2 and session 3, and trying to have a conversation with the person we're meeting to check out whether or not we're in the right sort of territory that they want to be. Some American psychologists talk about the idea of learning to fail well as a therapist, and I think being able to hear and talk with a young person and open to the conversation that may encourage people to say, actually, this isn't working for me, can we do it differently? Or I'm having trouble with my maths homework today and it's distracting me from thinking about things, can we talk a bit about that? It might not necessarily seem core to a therapist at that point in time, but I think being able and willing to be flexible and respond to some of these other issues can be really important for a young person to create the facilitative, warm relationship that they feel they can trust the therapist enough to then maybe continue talking in the future. So I guess kind of bringing all of that together, that combination of really thinking about valuing the young person's voice and trying to hear them throughout, so whether or not it's do they want to be in therapy, how do they want therapy to be while they're there, and did therapy work for them, or was it their perception that it was a useful facilitative space, become paramount to really thinking about what makes a good young person's service for me.